Welcome to the Lunch and Learn. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have a very exciting agenda with some wonderful panelists today to talk about the 2024 legislative session. And so I just want to welcome everyone and want to remind folks, if you have any questions you'd like to send in advance or at any point along the way in our discussion, you can put those into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer those at the end of the webinar. My name is Dominique Alex, and I'm the interim CEO at Mary's Place. Thank you for joining us at our Lunch and Learn. You can find the recordings of any past Lunch and Learns we've done on our website at marysplaceseattle.org, and there'll be a link that'll be in the chat for you to access those at your convenience. Before I introduce our panel, I'd like to begin our time today with a land acknowledgement. Mary's Place operates as a traditional home of the Coast Salish people. We offer with gratitude to elders and all other Coast Salish peoples, past, present, and future, who have made it possible for us to live, work, and play in this community, and invite each of us to seek authentic relationships with Indigenous communities and continue to learn about the past and present colonial impacts and to move beyond acknowledgement into action. Mary's Place works to ensure that no child sleeps outside by centering equity and opportunity for women and families. We began over 20 years ago as a day center for women experiencing homelessness in the downtown Seattle area. Our drop-in center for women experiencing homelessness or to find community still is the heart and soul of Mary's Place, and we serve about 50 women a day. We opened our first overnight shelter back in 2011, and today we are serving over 720 beds across 5 24/7 shelters in the King County area. But what we have learned, it is just not enough. As costs continue to rise and the pandemic related expenses like rental assistance and any of the supports that were being lended to our communities are leaving thousands of our King County families without their homes or at risk of losing their homes because all of those things have dried up. And to better set up the stage for our today's discussion and talk about the importance of policy change at the different levels of our government, Mary's Place is seeing an unprecedented need in our community. Our emergency family intake line that serves all of King County experiences about 50 callers on our wait list a day, and only 2 or 3 of those families are able to come inside because there just isn't enough room. And for those that are not able to come into our shelter, our mobile outreach team is meeting families wherever they are in our community, in their cars, their tents, to connect them to resources and flexible funds to address any of the barriers that they may be facing and move them back into housing quickly. But we know that the safest place for families is in their hard-won homes. So preventing families from falling into homelessness and intervening to stop that trauma on children and families can stop that generational cycle of homelessness. And so we are really leaning into our prevention services to stop that inflow into shelter in our services. Again, we invite you to look at past lunch and learns to learn a little bit more about the housing services or youth service programs and the impacts of systemic racism and oppression on homelessness, and anything else that you might find of interest to yourself there. So there is a link in the chat that has been placed there. But to kick us off for today's Lunch and Learn, we're going to talk about Washington State's 2024 legislative session, which started on January 8th. It is a short session, which is about 60 days, and lawmakers are considering hundreds of bills on various issues like increasing our housing supply, protecting renters, and providing financial relief for families that are struggling. And today we have some exciting features with some of our community partners that are working and doing things in Olympia during this session to improve around those important issues. And our Mary's Place team that does advocacy work is thoughtfully supporting these legislative priorities that are mission aligned with us, and working with partner organizations, and invited them to do some conversation today about important initiatives. And so I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists. And first up, we have Gian, who is a policy and advocacy associate at the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. Welcome. Next, we have Ani, who is a senior policy director at Children's Alliance. Thank you for being here. And Leanna, who is with Basic Needs Campaign Lead at the State Poverty Action Network. Thank you all, and we are so glad to have you be here today to share. To get started, I am going to ask each of our panelists to share a little bit about the work they are doing in their organizations and the top 3 legislative priorities that they are working on in Olympia this year. So Gian, can you help us get started and talk a little bit about the Low Income Housing Alliance? And before we get started, there is a comprehensive roadmap that the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance has that we are dropping in the chat for you all to look at, but going to go ahead and think about hearing a little bit from Gian. So could you share a little bit with us about your top priorities?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks for the opportunity today. So I'm Gia Mitchell, use he, him pronouns, and I'm gonna share some info on our legislative priorities and then share some ways y'all can get involved and assist with those a little bit later. So the slides that should be shown right now, this isn't all of our legislative priorities, but it's definitely the top 3 that are most relevant to this audience. First one, rent stabilization. A new version of the bill's been introduced this year. It's House Bill 2114 and its companion bill, SB 5961. Rent stabilization is a really top priority in Olympia right now. Everybody's talking about it, and it's being taken seriously for really the first time in a very long time. We have a real shot at passing it this year, and I'll go over some of the policy details on it in depth in my next slide. Our next policy that we're focused on is backfilling the state and local document recording fee shortfall to prevent cuts to homelessness services. So the county and the state each get a portion of document recording fee revenue, and the county's portion has to be spent on homelessness services. Due to the slowdown in the housing market, revenue created by the document recording fees dropped. Current projections are that there's going to be a shortfall in the county's portion of the revenue that, if not backfilled by the state, would result in cuts to homelessness services and permanent supportive housing. When $57 million was appropriated last session to backfill the shortfall at the state and local level, the legislature thought that that would be enough to cover the loss in revenue from the document recording fee shortfall. Unfortunately, the budget forecast made at the time underestimated the amount of funds that would be necessary to backfill the gap. We just found out last week that we're projected to need an additional $70 million to completely backfill the gap and prevent cuts to homelessness services across the state. So with the Housing Alliance, we know that the level of funding for homelessness services and housing is not currently enough to meet the need. So cuts to our current already insufficient capacity are completely unacceptable, and we're really pushing hard to make sure that doesn't happen. We'll be releasing an action alert later today on this issue, and we'll share a link in which you can take action on this specifically. We really need everyone's help with this because getting an additional $70 million in funding during a supplemental budget year is going to be extraordinarily difficult. Our next priority will be creating a permanent fund source of at least $200 million per year for the Housing Trust Fund for services and for housing with people with disabilities. So last year we championed House Bill 1628. It was led by Representative Chop. It is also commonly known as the REIT bill. And a new version of the bill has been introduced by Representative Berg and Senator Frame. It's called the Affordable Homes Act, and it's going to create a permanent fund source for the Housing Trust Fund by enacting a new state-level real estate transfer tax on very high-value properties. The tax is going to be tiered, so it can't be avoided by the seller listing the property just under the amount the tax would kick in at. The bill is going to be a tax break for most properties sold in Washington and an additional 1% tax for properties sold for over $3.025 million. We know we desperately need more affordable housing in our state, and this bill will assist in that by dedicating funds to affordable housing for people with developmental disabilities, rural and farm worker housing, and funds for the Apple Health and Homes program as well. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of an in-depth look at our rent stabilization bill. The House Bill 2114, the House version of the bill, passed out of its committee of origin already, and now there's a hearing on the rent stabilization bill in the House Appropriations Committee at 4 o'clock today. I'll share a link. We'll share a link later on in the presentation about how you can sign in pro to support that by 3 p.m. today. But this bill will protect manufactured homeowners and residential tenants. It'll limit rent increases to 5% every 12 months. Fees would count as rent for the purpose of the increase. So this means that if the landlord raised the rent 5%, they couldn't add an additional reoccurring $50 fee on top of that. It gives tenants 6 months notice for all rent increases of 3% or more. Tenants will be able to terminate the lease and move if the rent increase is at 3% or more. Limit late fees to $10 a month. It would limit all move-in fees to the equivalent of 1 month's rent or less. Create a landlord resource center so landlords would have some information on how to comply. And given enforcement with a private right of action, some additional penalties. And then we're also really excited about the fact that it would have some enforcement by the state attorney general's office as well. So tenants would have some backup. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to briefly share a story from one of the tenants that I've worked with over this last year. Her name's Trish. She's 68 years old. She's living on a fixed income. Her health prevents her from returning to work full time, and she's been forced to draw funds from her IRA at an unsustainable rate to pay for basic living expenses. In 2022, the rent was increased by $200 a month. In 2023, she received an additional $50 a month utilities fee and a rent increase of around $200 a month as well. She applied for affordable housing a year ago, but the wait list is at least 2 to 3 years in her rural area. She was displaced by the most recent rent increase. She was able to find a new place, but she's still rent burdened, and she's paying 45% of her income in rent each month. But now she's renting from a landlord that says that they value long-term stable tenants more than they value rent increases. Trish is still worried, though, because all she can do right now is trust the landlord at their word when they say that. If they change their mind, she could easily be displaced again. And stories from folks like Trish are why we're pushing for rent stabilization statewide. And that's what I got, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan, for sharing what your agency is working on to help really improve the housing affordability and homelessness prevention, especially the story you just shared about Trish. Next up, and if you have any questions that are coming up, just a reminder that you can use that Q&A tab to put those in there, and we will be answering questions at the end. So next up, I've got Ani with the Children's Alliance, and I know you all have been dedicated to placing racial justice at the heart of Washington's laws and budget priorities, and I know your policy portfolio covers 3 key areas. Can you share a bit about those for the 24 priorities?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dominique. And I also have a slide deck that you should be seeing here shortly. Hello again. It's nice to be with y'all today. So I do want to share a little bit about Children's Alliance as an organization before I launch into the 2024 priorities we have. Next slide, please. So we are a statewide nonpartisan nonprofit child advocacy organization, and we partner with community stakeholders and others to advocate for anti-racist policy solutions that improve the lives of kids and families who are furthest from opportunity. And so in that effort, we do focus on 3 key policy areas, which are early learning and childcare, health equity, and economic justice. And as part of our work on early learning, we do convene the Early Learning Action Alliance, which is a coalition of over 40 like-minded organizations. Next slide, please. So in terms of our 2024 priorities related to early learning and childcare specifically, this session, there are a number of bills that we're supporting related to expanding and streamlining access to subsidized childcare, specifically through the Working Connections Childcare Program. And you can see on the slide a few of the bills that we support. Washington Child Care Centers Association is leading on Senate Bill 5870, and the Washington State Association for Head Start and ECAP, which stands for Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program, is leading on House Bills 2124 and 1945. I'm going to focus on Senate Bill 5870 because it does share some of the elements of the other two bills, and we do support all three. So Senate Bill 5870 would improve access to high-quality childcare for families and improve sustainability within the childcare system. It would expand eligibility to include childcare providers who were not covered by previous legislation and families that demonstrate likely eligibility through participation in other programs like those providing food benefits. And that's important because, as we know, families who receive food benefits have already demonstrated eligibility based on means. And so the requirement to document and prove eligibility again can sometimes lead families to miss out on services. And we also know that many childcare providers are women and women of color in particular. And so we appreciate this bill because it fills a gap in equity for childcare providers, particularly those that work for state and federally funded learning programs like Head Start and ECAP, and to ensure that those families also have access to the care that they need. I do want to highlight that House Bill 1945 is scheduled for executive session this Friday, which is a point at which the bill could be voted favorably out of committee and move forward in the legislative process. So please consider sending a message to members of the committee to let them know that you support this bill. And I will provide links either in the chat or in that post-event email so you can share those support. Next slide, please. So this session, we are continuing our focus on behavioral health when it comes to health equity. We recently published a report that thoroughly examined the youth behavioral health crisis in our state. And while things are dire, we know that there's solutions if we approach them holistically. So to that end, we are supporting the 12 primary recommendations and the many related support items put forth by the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group and its 2024 report to the legislature. So importantly, this is a work group that's made up of stakeholders from all corners of the issue. So the report truly emphasizes the need for a multifaceted and integrated approach, which is so important. Today, there is a bill being heard that comes from these recommendations, Senate Bill 6216, which establishes statewide coordination for student behavioral health services. We are testifying in Olympia today in support of this bill. In fact, I just got word that our executive director, I think, finished his testimony. And so one of the key things that we support in this bill is that it would require behavioral health care be provided in schools. Kids and youth have said repeatedly that they want behavioral health care and that they want to have it at school because that's where they spend most of their time. And so this bill is responding to that and would put many other systems in place to support it. You can submit written testimony as many as 12 hours after a hearing takes place. So if this item speaks to you, please do consider submitting written testimony in support of the bill. Next slide, please. So our economic justice item is supporting a wealth tax on the ultra wealthy, and the advocacy work around the wealth tax and House Bill 1473 and Senate Bill 5486 in particular it's being led by the Economic Opportunity Institute. And as it stands now, billions of dollars of financial properties are going untaxed and allowing a small subset of our community to accumulate incredible amounts of wealth while working class families are left to carry the load. And so this bill does the work of creating a fairer tax system by making state revenue sources that are away from the working class communities, and finally asking the ultra wealthy to pay their fair share. So this looks like charging a 1% tax on wealth over $250 million when it results solely from ownership of things like stocks, bonds, and other financial property. Next slide, please. So with that, I want to say thank you for your attention and just reiterate some of the ways you can get involved. Please consider joining our mailing list for weekly emails outlining the ways you can advocate for these and other causes you care about. You can sign up on our website. And then you should also consider visiting our website to see our full legislative agenda, as well as our bill tracker, which we update weekly during sessions, so you can keep tabs on the bills you care about. And then finally, I want to just emphasize that registration is open for our annual Lobby Day event, Have a Heart for Kids Day, which is taking place on February 15th in Olympia. And this year, we're excited to partner with 5 other advocacy organizations for the event to make it bigger and better. So we would love to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ani. If you have any questions you'd like to ask Ani or things that have just come up in general, please remember to leave those in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Next up, we have our final panelist. Her name is Leanna, and I know that you've been working with the Poverty Action Network, and y'all have been meeting with local organizations across the state to really understand the needs and barriers to assistance. I'm hoping you can share a little bit more about your top priorities and how those are informed by listening sessions with folks.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here today, and for all of you for joining, and glad to be here. So I'll start also by sharing a little bit about Poverty Action Network, what we do. What we do is we go and we listen in communities all across the state, and we hear from folks living on low incomes. What are the things that are barriers to access to the help that they need? How are what's preventing them from meeting their basic needs? Our cash assistance programs working well, and seeing what can we do in the legislative sense to help fix those problems. So a lot of the work that we do is focused on cash assistance programs, because we hear about those every time we go and listen, and we hear about different ways where folks can there's opportunities to make those programs better to actually meet folks' basic needs more easily. So I want to highlight 3 things that we have going through the legislature this year that will hopefully help folks meet those basic needs a little bit better. So the first one is there's a program called the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, as I'll be calling it, and it's the only cash assistance program for families in our state. And there's a time limit, and those who often, if you go past the time limit, then you're cut off of your assistance. And what we've seen is that those who tend to be cut off of assistance disproportionately are Black and Indigenous families. For a while during COVID, they removed this policy, which was great. We saw access become more equitable, but unfortunately it got put back into place when the pandemic ended. And so we would like to we think that people should be able to get help when they still need it. People in our state also think that. So we want to make sure that folks are able to have those time limit exemptions when they need them. So that is House Bill 2007 that we're working to support, making its way through the House right now. So people should be able to get help when they need it. The second thing is when you are on TANF, and you should also be receiving child support from a non-custodial parent, instead of that child support coming to you, the child support instead goes to the state, and it's used as a revenue source instead of support for those families. So we know that folks who qualify for TANF are already really economically marginalized and need all of the dollars that they are entitled to that should be coming to them. And removing someone's child support is an inappropriate revenue source for the state. So really want to make sure that people can have access to their own resources, especially when they're in times of need. One example I want to highlight from our community is we have a friend named Amy, and she should get $700 of child support every month. But since she's on TANF, she only gets to receive $100 every month, meaning she gets $100, the state gets $600, which is 6 times more than she's getting from her child support. So children are not a revenue source, and child support should not be used as such. So the House bill that's going through this year is House Bill 1652, also making its way through. It's on the Senate side right now. So working to support that. The last bill that I'll highlight is House Bill or Senate Bill 6226. And this one has to deal with every state has something in place to try to mitigate fraud in their state. But what we've seen when we've looked into this department, what we've heard from community members is that folks feel that people of color are more targeted for these types of investigations, which are often invasive, and so do Spanish speakers. And so we went to DSHS, we asked for this data, took a long time, and they finally revealed to us this data. And the findings were consistent with what we were hearing from community members, that there are racial disparities. And so our first step to solving this problem is we need transparency from the department. We need them to be telling us who's getting investigated, what are the outcomes, how are you spending your money? These are state dollars. So our ask is for transparency this year. With the Senate bill, it would require them to report on these outcomes regularly so we can see where they're at with their equity, which is not in a good place. And then we can do more change from there. So that's Senate Bill 6226. Yeah, because folks should not be intimidated off of benefits. I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you so much, Leanna. I think these stories are really important to hear and to better understand the impacts that some of that lack of transparency that you talk about can have on families that we're not even aware of. So thank you so much. I want to open it back up now. And just that reminder, as Leanna said, if there's any questions that you have for her or any of the other panelists, remind folks that there's a Q&A box at the bottom. You can continue to put your questions in and we will answer those towards the end. But before we get to the Q&A session, we've got one little bit that I kind of want to open it up to the panelists, and feel free to jump in. I'll start with Gian, kind of going back to the top and just wondering sorry, I lost my train of thought here. When you think about how you're engaging in your work in the community and how our Lunch and Learn attendees can get involved, just wondering if you might share a little bit more about that. How can people get involved and how you're engaging in your work in the community?
So we're a statewide organization, and one of the primary ways we get folks involved essentially is through highlighting ways that they can take action to tell their lawmakers about why they should support these policies. So I'll drop two links in the chat right now. And the first one is a link to the sign in pro in the House Appropriations Committee hearing today. If you could do that by 3 o'clock today when it closes, that's great. It's the sign in pro on rent stabilization, the bill I talked about earlier. And that really makes a difference. At the last hearing in the House for this bill, we got over 2,000 sign-in pros, and I think the opposition had about like 700-ish. So we're proud of that. The other one is that real estate transfer tax bill that I talked about, the Affordable Homes Act. That hearing is tomorrow, also 4 to 6 p.m. If you sign in pro on that prior to 3 p.m. And then we've also got some actions you can take to protect the homelessness services. And that's actually going to come out in an email that my colleague's working on later today. And we'll include that link in the follow-up email that Mary's Place sends out to everybody. And then if you're interested in some in-person action, we have our Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day, Tuesday, January 30th. That's next Tuesday. It's in person in Olympia this year, and folks can come meet with their lawmakers, be in community with a bunch of different folks from across the state who are all pushing hard for tenant protections. And then and I believe they'll drop that link in the chat in a second here. And then if you want to just stay aware of what's going on and get like the inside scoop, you can attend our Friday advocate session briefings every Friday, 2 to 3 p.m. during legislative session. That link will be dropped in the chat as well in a moment. And those spaces are just really great spaces where you can come ask questions, and we'll give you the inside scoop on what's going down in Olympia at that moment. And then for folks who are watching a recording of this video, you can go to rentfairness.org to take the current action that's currently available. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gian. Next, I wondered if you had anything to suggest, Ani?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the opportunity again. We are planning to share some links in the post-event email or in the chat, but I know in the post-event email, so please look out for that. I think the first thing I would mention is we would love to work with you around your advocacy goals. We have an amazing mobilization manager who recently came on board and is deeply steeped in the community and is committed to expanding our network well beyond. We are statewide, but of course some of our saturation is in the Western Washington area because we're located in Seattle, and so we are committed to reaching east across the mountains. And so we invite people to take the 2-minute survey that we're going to send out this afternoon with information that you can share about how you'd like to get involved this legislative session, and you can connect directly with our mobilization manager. Her email will also be included. Her name is Debbie Carlson. And so it's just Debbie.Carlson, CARLSEN at children'salliance.org. We also are always interested in connecting with folks to hear their personal stories. As I mentioned, we're committed to working with and not just for community. And so we would love to connect with you if you have a story to share related to early learning, health equity, or economic justice. And I would also invite you to connect with our early learning manager, or excuse me, yes, our early learning managers, or our mobilization manager or communications manager with those stories. Our communications manager is Charlotte Linton, and so it's charlotte.linton@children'salliance.org. And again, that information will be included in the email this afternoon. We also, as I said, we have a mailing list that allows people to stay on top of our advocacy work, and we weekly send sign-in opportunities when those are available. We share blog posts that sort of recap the last couple weeks of session, or that otherwise highlight a key issue that is being discussed, or that's at the top of our minds in the week that we're in. And so please do think about joining our mailing list if you haven't already. And then I think I would also plug again our Advocacy Day in Olympia. This is the first year that we're going to be back in person after the pandemic, and we're really excited to join with the other partner organizations we're working with. That includes the Washington State Association for Head Start and ECAP, Families of Color Seattle, Social Venture Partners, excuse me, Save the Children Action Network, and some others. And we're just really excited to arrive and be a show of force and really show that this is a movement. So those are the key ways I think that I would highlight getting involved in this session. And we are always thinking about sort of long-term mobilization goals. And so we really want to connect with you and make sure that we're supporting your advocacy goals as well. So please do reach out.
Thank you so much, Ani. And I'm wondering, Leanna, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Oh, always. I'll give one shout out to Ani too. I remember in 2020, the last time there was an in-person lobby day from Children's. It was so cool to see, like, people brought their families. There was a bunch of kids on the Capitol. So it's really cool to see the community in motion, all together, raising voices, making a change. So and GMs too. So if you have a chance to make it to a lobby day, it's cool to go and be a part of something. So do it if you're able. And then on the poverty action side, session comes after fast, especially in a short session. It's only 60 days and everything has to happen in those days. So we have email alerts that go out. It's called our network news that you can sign up for. I think that it's already been dropped in the chat. But also check out our website. We post a lot on socials too, different action alerts that come up, and it'll be a lot for the next 2 months, and then it'll kind of slow down. So if you're like, I wasn't expecting a million emails, it's just during session, and there's lots of opportunities to engage. Also, if you have a story of being related, if any of the issues that I brought up, let's kind of strike a chord. If you're like, no, I'd like to speak about that to the legislature, even if you've never testified before, we're down to help support you, learn how to do that. We'll walk you through it the whole way. So yeah, definitely down to support. I'll put my contact in the chat if you're interested. We also have an opportunity to sign in pro. We like to call it 10 seconds of advocacy because it takes so quick and it makes such a big difference. But if you'd like to sign in pro for that transparency bill related to the Office of Fraud and Accountability, I'll drop a link in the chat as well.
Thank you so much. I'm going to get a round of applause for our wonderful panelists. Thank you all so much. I also would like to move into our questions now. I've been talking about the Q&A box at the bottom. If you continue to have any questions, please make sure you put them in there. But I've got Katrina, who's on our team. She's the person behind the Zoom curtain. And so I'm wondering if you can read any questions that we might have so we can get those answers out.
Hello, yes, and thank you all. This is incredibly informative today. So we have just a couple of questions so far. The first is there any difference between rental corporations versus private owners in the bills proposed? I often feel like the bills hurt private owners and cause them to sell their properties versus corporations that are increasingly greedy.
I'm guessing that was a question for the Housing Alliance, and the short answer to that is no. The long answer is that a lot of landlords love to bring up, quote unquote, like mom and pop